Hello, I'm Philip Hughes. I'm the chair of the Maroondah Interfaith Network. This is a series of seminars about building community. Through the last 7 months, much of our community life has been suspended. We've not been able to meet even close members of our family face to face, or friends, let alone those who are involved in our religious communities. We are hopefully on the verge of coming out of this challenging period. The steps may be small, but they will happen. And it's time to think about how we will use our new freedom. Will we do things differently? Will we relate differently to the people around us? Will we construct or participate in community in different ways? In the first seminar, I introduced the four dimensions of community life. We talked a little bit about bonds, the relationships we have with people close to us who know us well, people we can turn to for support and in need. And then we talked about bridges, the wide range of people we come across in daily life, people who serve us in shops and cafes, our colleagues at work, the people we collaborate with in clubs and other activities, and then linkages, the relationships we have with the organisations in our community. And then finally, the cross-cutting ties with people who are different from us. Now, Bob Dixon spoke to us about the relationships we have with people within our religious organisations, and he described how those relationships are strengthened when we're collaborating with others in particular activities within the church, whether we're in a group of readers or cleaners, or working in the mission of the church, in a mission group, or supporting a school or whatever. Reverend Glenn Lockery talked about the importance of being open to the other person, allowing relationships to develop wherever they might lead. And something that he suggested might be really valuable as we come out of the disruption of the pandemic. And then Rev Scott Hawkins spoke of neighbourliness and the great variety of activities that his church, Urban Life, has initiated, the programs and activities to build neighbourliness. And he encouraged us to think about the various groups of people around us and how we can be neighbour to them. At the heart of community, and this was something that Bob spoke about, is trust. Trust in the people we meet day by day. And that means people acting in a trustworthy way, but also the willingness to assume that people will act in a trustworthy way. And the another value is reciprocity. It's the willingness to act for the good of others, expecting that others will do good by us in the future. There's a couple of points I just want to make as we come to talk about bridges and so on today. It's often easy for religious groups to build bridges within their groups. People share values, they share the approach to life, and that's part of what our religious groups are about. But sometimes religious groups actually create distrust of others outside the group because they see others as having different values and attitudes. All over the world, religious groups have contributed to building trust in some ways, but also in some instances to division and distrust. And it seems to me that that's something that we work on as the Maroondah Interfaith Network. We're trying to counter the potential distrust between religious groups. One of the ways we do that is by helping groups to explore their commonalities. When we actually come together, we often find that we have much more in common with each other than we anticipated. but it's also a matter of understanding our differences. The other point that I wanted to make, just as we begin our reflections today, is that bridges used to be built by building clubs and associations, and we used to have formal structures for our organisations. And many of the formal structures of organisations have been in decline over the past 40 years or so, including the membership of religious organisations overall. There's lots of people in our community who are not members of anything in particular, or at least members of a group that actually meets. And I think that's a challenge for our religious organisations and for the community as a whole. There's some evidence that the decline in formal memberships, however, is countered by informal associations, the groups of friends who meet for coffee, the social networking and so on that we may be involved in. It's also countered, so it's countered by the connections people form over social media. But on the other hand, we need to ask whether these in fact create the same sense of trust and well-being, how adequately those informal associations actually replace the formal ones. So that's two issues just to think about as we think about building bridges in our community.
Yeah, thank you, Norm. Last time I spoke about bonding social capital, and this time Philip has asked me to speak about bridging social capital. I'm going to share my screen and I'll tell you what I mean by bridging social capital. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Yep.
And okay, so there's two main types of social capital. Philip mentioned a couple of others as well. Firstly, there's the bonding social capital, which I talked about last time, which is groups, the social capital that is built by groups working together, and it's directed inwards, so it fosters feelings of belonging and sense of community and shared purpose, all that sort of stuff. But today my focus is on bridging social capital, which is directed from the group outwards towards others. So we're talking about reaching out to others, to invite, to include them, to contact them in all sorts of ways. And today I'll be talking about how local congregations do that and giving some results from the National Church Life Survey. From the Australian Bureau of Statistics point of view, bridging refers to relations with friends, associates, and colleagues with different backgrounds. And I'm expanding it a little bit to include people in the wider community that may not classify or qualify as friends, associates, and colleagues, but are still living in our own communities. Bridging social capital is generated by a parish or local congregation when it connects with people beyond the parish community through activities concerned with evangelisation, social justice, community welfare, or even through the arts and community festivals. And as a bit of an aside, I want to mention this thing too, that parish or local church can contribute to social capital indirectly through the private activities of its members. Numerous studies have found that church attenders are more likely than non-attenders to be volunteers in the wider community as well. And the reason why I've included that aside is that we're in the presence of one of the major researchers in that field in Australia, and that's Dr. Philip Hughes. Philip has done a lot of work on that and found some very interesting results. But now to look at the National Church Life Survey, I'm sure most of you are familiar with NCLS. You've probably belonged to churches. If you're Christians, you probably belong to churches that have taken part in the NCLS, the National Church Life Survey, which has now been going since 1991, every 5 years, looking at the behaviours, attitudes, demography and practices of church attenders across a broad range of Christian denominations. The NCLS have developed a series of core qualities on which every church of every denomination and probably every faith community of all different faiths have some sense of these 9 core qualities constructed in different combinations. Last time I talked about the first 3, which constitute bonding social capital. They're all inward looking. Today I'm going to talk about those 3, the bridging social capitals, which are outward looking. And in fact, I'm only going to talk about 2 of them, given our time limits. And in the middle, you've got the leadership qualities, without which in a local congregation, those other things can't happen. So let's look at number 7, practical and diverse service, and number 8, willing and effective faith sharing. Firstly, the service. When we ask church attenders about the sorts of activities that they're involved in their local parish or congregation, 19% of Catholics said that they were involved in some sort of community service or social justice or welfare activity that's run by the parish, run by their own church. It's well down on the other types of Christian denominations, Anglican, Pentecostal, other mainstream Protestant, and all attenders. Catholics aren't as good, apparently, at offering service to others. But those numbers can be a bit misleading, because you've got to remember that Catholic parishes and congregations are, by and large, much larger than the others. The average size of a Catholic parish in terms of attendance at Sunday worship is about 450 around Australia. And that's, I believe, much larger than Anglicans and most mainstream Protestants, although it may not be larger than Pentecostal. What about this sort of service? What about service activities not connected to the parish? And the sorts of services I've got in mind are listed at the bottom there. So parish activities that you might be involved in but are not part of your local church. Here Catholics do a bit better by comparison with others, but still less than the other religious or the other Christian denominational groups. Let's turn our attention to the willing and effective faith sharing. Again, we look at activities connected to the local church, this time of a nature that are outreach or evangelistic, bringing the good news. And Catholics here are pretty woeful by comparison with the, certainly with the Pentecostals. Look at them, 29%. Pentecostals are very much oriented towards sharing their faith with others. But even Anglicans and mainstream Protestants do better than us Catholics. And what about with inviting others to church? Again, Catholics are not as good at it, especially if you look at that first row. Have they invited someone to church in the last 12 months? Well, a quarter of Catholics have, a bit more, 28%, but more than half of Pentecostals, 55%, have done so. And there's another time here when the figures are a little bit misleading in comparing Catholics and other denominations. Because when you say to Catholics, have you invited someone to church? And they say yes, they don't think primarily in terms of evangelism, which the Pentecostals do. They think primarily in terms of hospitality. Yes, I invited all my relatives to our child's baptism service. I invited them all to come to their first communion. It's not about getting them to come in order to encourage them to join the faith. It's more about being hospitable and let's come and enjoy this family celebration together. I want to give you 2 parish-based examples of practical and diverse service and willing and effective faith sharing. The first is the service, and that's the St Vincent de Paul Society. You all know about the Vinnie's op shops and possibly about the Vinnie's soup vans, but most parishes in Australia have a Vinnie's group, a St Vincent de Paul group. There's over 300 in Victoria alone. They're not all in parishes. Some are in universities, some are in workplaces, but the primary place for them is in parishes. And these are people who visit people, needy people, elderly people, poor people, prisoners, or recently released prisoners, for example, visit them in their homes and help them in any way that they can. financially or through just being someone to talk to. The St Vincent de Paul Society seeks out the poor and marginalised wherever they may be. They have a saying that no work of charity is foreign to them. It's not proselytising. They don't visit people and try to convince them to become Catholics. They're very respectful of a person's personal point of view. And it's also not just service, it's a prayer group as well. Members in all of these parish groups pray together. I think their rule is at least once every 2 weeks, but more often than that is common. In terms of faith sharing, I want to just mention the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, otherwise known as the RCIA, which is the primary way that people who do want to become Catholics come into the Catholic Church. It's also called the catechumenate, and the people who participated in it are called catechumens. The catechumenate is an ancient tradition in the Church that accompanies and supports people who inquire about becoming Catholic. The process generally lasts about 9 or 10 months, and it culminates in the Easter service, where the inquirer becomes a Catholic, being received into the Church, being baptised if necessary, and receiving the other sacraments of initiation. But as always, there is never any pressure to join, but only a respectful relationship that allows each person the freedom to experience their own spiritual journey. And just like the rest of us, we are here today are on our own spiritual journey, and I'll hand back to Norm.
Thanks very much, Dr. Bob. Right on time. You did pretty well. I got the message through on our little chat thing on the corner. Venerable Chang Ji, you were going to be on, but you got ill. But you're here now. So let me describe to everybody who you are. You're an ordained nun of the Chinese Mahayan tradition of Buddhism under the Dharma Drum Mountain. In your role as International Affairs Special Assistant to the late Most Venerable Master Sheng Yen, founder of Dharma Drum Mountain Buddhist Association, you have a representative to the United Nations. You participated in organised side events, including the participation of youth and multiple faiths religious leaders in many international conferences, including the World Economic Forum, World Bank, as well as meetings of the United Nations on social development, sustainable development, and climate change. You're committed into leadership workshops and meditation retreats, and you've spread awareness of spiritual environmentalism. A big welcome to you, and we'll look forward to your input. Thank you very much, Chang Ji.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for inviting me to this webinar and being with all of you. Today, we're actually living in a world of silos and specializations that are marginally consistent with one another. So too often today, the right hand does not work well with the left hand. But this fragmentation is largely the fruit of the independent historical evolution of these elements, which today actually we're seeing are gradually coming closer and closer in relationship with each other. Especially in the circles that I work with, people are starting to discover interconnection of a lot of stuff. You can't just tackle one issue without affecting other things, or an effective solution for one thing actually requires the support of other sectors that they never noticed before. So the COVID pandemic actually brought this to light even more. The essential workers, we barely register in our awareness as we rush through our pre-pandemic lives. Suddenly, with this pandemic, suddenly they became heroes to keep us safe, and we started to see them. We were so self-absorbed, we didn't even realize how interconnected we are and how we are all different parts of a bigger clockwork of planet Earth and Gaia. So during this time of great duress, The greatest human potential actually emerges. We see this as communities come together to support and volunteer in solidarity, but at the same time, the divisive fragmentation of the human species wreaks chaos in violence, bigotry, and hatred. So I think that the theme of this webinar series on building community couldn't have come at a more timely manner. We're actually deeply involved in a major evolutionary process. We have to change the way we're living and the way we're responding to each other. So building community, there's a lot of these conversations that are going around the world. We talk in idealistic terms about the fraternity of humankind, and it is all wonderful. Ironically, though, on the ground, we're competitive, we're isolated, and we're in silos. So the pandemic illustrated this fragmentation through social inequalities in access to healthcare, food security, jobs, so on and so forth. So we witness with great trepidation the breakdown of the life systems as we know it. However, this breakdown is also an enormous opportunity for evolutionary breakthrough. So it's an opportunity to collaborate instead of competing, community building, right? It's allowing a stage where we can all share what we have so that we can all start getting the traction necessary to co-create a system and structure that houses life in transformation and to bring back the sacredness of all life on earth. And I think for a lot of the faith-based organizations, the sacredness of life on earth is so important that we kind of got disconnected from and we've forgotten. I'd like to share with you an elder actually from an indigenous tribe in Costa Rica said that we, the civilized people, have one big issue. I loved him and what he said that. So we consider ourselves separate from biodiversity, but we're actually part of biodiversity on this planet. So therefore, this collaboration and co-creation is not just for the fraternity of humankind, but it's the fraternity of all biodiversity that shares this planet. Our conditioned and mechanical reductionist worldview is shaping our communities to be in groups that don't dialogue with each other. So we need holistic approaches that reintegrates and regenerates. So I guess today's topic or the theme of today is bridging. And I think that's a very important topic to talk about. So to build bridges across silos and differences, how do we do that? I think one of the first steps we need to do is we need to get in touch with our hearts. That commonality is our heart, in touch with the humanity in each of us, especially the humanity of the person on the other side of the divide. So deep listening and deep compassion guides us through dialogue to the higher mind. And this higher mind sees beyond the polarized distinctions. So in the Greek etymology of dialogos, di means through. Logos is the higher mind. So dialogo or dialogue occurs when we commune with each other in such a way so that it accesses our highest wisdom together. It's not just one group convincing another group, but it's together finding out what is this highest wisdom. So building community begins with this. It's a field that is beyond right or wrong. Here is a space. Meet me there. So the collective wisdom generated from the union of various worldviews and perspectives is actually a rich ground where the universal compassionate heart can generate holistic new horizons that leaves no one behind. So therefore, I humbly propose that the new norm of the world, there's a lot of this thing floating around, people are talking about post-pandemic, the new norm. So the new norm of the world is not stability, but it is of transformation. So we need the development of new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life that develops global empathy. And this cannot happen without the deep connection through building community. So how can we respect diversity, and at the same time find our commonality. And I think one of the ways is through our hearts. We feel, we don't just think and talk, but we feel with our heart, the heart coherence. I do hope that we're remembered as being the generation that woke up to a new reverence for life. Let us leave behind all those obstructionist attitudes, from denial to indifference to resignation or blind confidence in technical solutions. And let's go to a universal solidarity. So let us unleash potential, not solve problems, but unleash potential, because our diversity enriches our human experience. And this collective wisdom and creativity guides humankind in growing into our potential. Problem solving tend to make something wrong in order to make something right. And this is actually a polarization that makes it very hard to build community. So let me close with this quote from Einstein, which I feel is important in building community. So Einstein said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge." Imagination is more important than knowledge. And I very much agree with Einstein, because I often say to students in my classes, if you cannot imagine that yourself or a situation can be different than the way it currently is, then nothing will change. So thus our lives as humankind, our lives become a hero's roadmap instead of being a product of consumerism and dehumanization. So let us change this storyline around the COVID-19. It can be the coronation that humankind come to embrace the unity and the sacredness of existence and come together in solidarity of our commonality instead of the fragmentation due to our differences. So building community, I believe, is one of the essential blocks for this emergence. Thank you.
I think everyone would agree that it was pretty inspirational. Thanks so much, Ven Chang Ji. Scott Hawkins, you're a pastor at the Urban Life in Ringwood, it says here, and I know you are. In the previous seminar, you described many community building projects which your church has initiated. And today, you're going to extend to us more insight into your community creation activities. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that a lot. Before I begin on this NAIDOC week, I'd like to offer my own acknowledgement of country, and particularly of the Indigenous elders, past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous person who is here with us today as well. A special welcome during this week, and especially, not welcome, an acknowledgement during this week. I'd also like to offer an acknowledgement of faith for all faith leaders and faith elders that are here with us as well. As was introduced last month, I talked about how half of the Christian gospel is love your neighbour as yourself, and what neighbourliness can look like, and how we have worked and wrestled with that at Urban Life. I spoke a little bit about how Urban Life supports neighbourliness and urban transformation through a number of different projects, including our Good Neighbour project and our connection with the Maroondah community of wellbeing, through our involvement in Brighter Futures and our social enterprises, which aim to provide better outcomes for kids in the out-of-home care sector, including those in foster care and kinship care and permanent care. Looking at our overseas aid and relief projects and what we've been able to do, particularly in partnership with locals in Cambodia, and also our coalition with the Mullumalum Indigenous Gathering Place and other Indigenous communities based around Darwin, and the Martu Christian Fellowship in the East Pilbara. Our friendship with the Babes Project locally in Maroondah, and our ongoing involvement with Clean Up Australia Day as a formation of who we are. But wanting to particularly focus on our winter shelter program, which was initiated number of years ago. With regards to homelessness, on any given night in Australia, 1 in 200 people are homeless, which is a shocking statistic. Some of the benefits of the winter shelter program that we've found is that it was a community response using community resources for local homelessness. What we realised was there were people sleeping rough in our local community, and we had church buildings that were going empty in our local community. And we weren't wealthy, but we were wealthy in terms of volunteer resources and people resources. So we worked out how we could combine those two things. And out of that, with an example from England, we started the Winter Shelter program. And it's been fantastic in engaging people of faith with the issue of homelessness and local homeless people as well, which has been wonderful. It's engaged the community of faith in a meaningful way, whereas in the past it was labelled that the community of faith wasn't gathering in a particularly meaningful way. Then it will offer genuine care to the guests who would otherwise be sleeping rough, and with some incredible flow-on effects for that as well. And then finally, the opportunity for community advocacy and awareness. The reasons why people are homeless, again, some of the stereotypical reasons are not the main causes, but in fact, the cost of housing in the Maroondah area is just prohibitive, as well as the main cause of homelessness for us locally is domestic violence. And that's why we saw previously a staggering number of children who find themselves homeless as well. And the statistics for children who are under 10 years old that are homeless are shockingly bad. If we continue on, Philip. Only 3.2% of rental housing in Maroondah is affordable. And in 2016, which was when the last records were tallied, only 24 rentals were considered to be affordable. Now, affordable was worked out at spending less than 1/3 of the average income on rental. And there were only 24 available rentals that were classed as affordable in Maroondah in 2016. There are 2,550 people in Maroondah who experienced a form of homelessness in 2016, with only that small number of rentals for them to all be vying for. And 48% of those were due to domestic violence. The Hebrew scriptures encourage us to give food to the hungry and to care for the homeless, and it could not be plainer than that. We felt, in terms of bridge building, the most significant first step that we could make was to offer an apology. On Homelessness Week, a number of us went homeless for a period of time, but realised we couldn't really understand what homelessness was about by camping out in the street, because we didn't experience the same hopelessness that somebody who doesn't have a home has. We had a warm place that we could go to if we needed. We had warm meals that we could access if we needed them. My car was parked down the street. So we were pretending at homelessness. And the first thing that we realised we needed to do was to make a formal apology. So Urban Life issued this apology. I've got it here, but we don't need to go through it. It's available on our website, and it will be available on the recording of this video as well. But it was a significant step for us to begin our posture of engagement with the local community through an apology, and that was wonderful and healing for us, as well as it was for the guests that we were able to care for.
That's sort of the hands-on story. That's excellent. Thanks very much. Swami Sunishthananda will be Can I see you there? You're there, Swami. Yes, you are. Right. Let me describe who you are to those who don't know. You're a leader in the Hindu community, in particular a leader of the Vedanta Society in Melbourne. And one of the particular characteristics of the Vedanta Society is its commitment to interfaith dialogue, and hence here. Thanks, Swami.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good afternoon. I thank the Maroondah Interfaith Network for organizing this wonderful online seminar series on this building community. As has been highlighted by Reverend Philip Hughes in the very beginning, that there are the 4 dimensions in community building. The first seminar was about bonding. This seminar is about the bridging. The next will be on linkage, and the last will be on the cross-cutting ties. So though this seminar is actually intended to highlight the bridging, I would in short just discuss all the aspects of this community bonding. So the first component, that the bonds, which was the topic of the last seminar, we feel that there are some of the major factors that binds us within the family and with the close friends. So you will find in all, whatever may be our tradition, whatever may be our religion, there is an auspiciousness, a sacredness, a sense of sacredness is there whenever the marriage is there, the wedding ceremony is there. There is some vows, and that gives it the sacredness. Why I'm speaking that in all our these bondings, as a human being, you will find a very interesting thing, that the feeling is something that we feel, that is something common to all in the animal kingdom. Other animals also feel, they do feel. But as a human being, the uniqueness is that our feelings and emotions can be guided by will. That we will first, and then through that will we guide our emotions, our feeling. The more we can do that, the more integrated we are. That's the thing which we stress in the modern time, where we find too much importance is given to the feelings and emotions. We forget that as a human being, we have the uniqueness to guide that feeling and emotions with our will. The more we can do that, the more the bonding in our family, in our friends circle, we will find is keeping us integrated. Another aspect of this binding is the unconditional love. In Vedanta, we speak it of as nishkama karma. The idea is the love which we have in our heart, love, compassion, kindness. Just take the mother's love for the child. Does the mother own that love? We can never say that. We will find that we are biologically programmed. If we don't believe in God, we have to believe we are biologically programmed to love, to show our affection to the kith and kin. And that is something, that love is something which is flowing through my heart. It is not the thing which I just own. I am just a channel of the God's program, God's plan to create this, to sustain this world. To sustain this world, God has implanted love in our heart. So if we are aware of that fact, then what happens? That we start feeling that we are just a mere instrument, a channel through which God's love is working. And as a result, what happens? The expectation factor, that gets diminished. That I am just the channel through which the God's love is flowing, and there it rests. Even in the Christian, why we revere Jesus, that the one who even in the cross can pray for the one who are crucifying him. That's that unconditional love. That is possible in our life if we are aware of the fact that I am just the mere channel through which the God's love is flowing. And the more we become aware of that fact, the forbearance comes, which is very much important in keeping our relations intact. As there is not much scope for discussion, the simple thing. Nowadays, we will find that because of the lack of forbearance in the most of the cases, in the family violence and everywhere, we will find is a lack of that forbearance. What happens? That we jump from the frying pan to the oven in most of the cases. Just a little forbearance is required. In most of the cases, we are jumping from the frying pan to the oven because of the lack of that forbearance. So these are the factors, if we are always aware of, that our will is important. Everywhere, a politician, before taking the responsibility, has to take some oath. The doctor, before becoming a doctor, has to take some oath. The sportsman, before starting the sports or the games, has to take some oath. Because our passions should be guided by that oath, by that vow. And it is same in our family life. And we as a human being have that faculty, and we should be aware of that. The second is the unconditional love. And the third is the capacity of forbearance, which to a certain extent is dependent on that unconditional love. So now to the bridging factor, we will, before discussing on the bridging, I will just make you aware of one of the wonderful sutra in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra of the Yoga scripture. What that sutra speaks of? Maitri Karuna Mudita Upekshanam Sukha Dukkha Punya Apunya Vishayanam Bhavanata Chitta Prasadanam. Very nice. That whenever you see happiness in others, try to relate through friendship, through amity. Why we are saying that? As long as a bond is concerned within the family, it's natural that I react with friendliness, with amity when I share happiness with my kith and kin. But is it a fact when I'm just going to see the happiness of my neighbors? Just in the Scott was, as our Reverend Scott was indicating, that love your neighbor as thy own, as you love yourself. So that's the wonderful dictum which is in the Bible, which has been spoken of here also. That generally we find that when we find that the others are happy, apart from my own family members, apart from my own close friend circle, we are either indifferent or sometimes there's a rancouring, a jealousy. So here they are saying consciously, we have to be very conscious. We have to just nip the bud at the very root. That whenever such feelings come, all the unhappiness, all the disintegration in the society we find is actually very subjective. All the reformation has to come from within. We cannot just impose from outside. From the within, that we have to be aware of the fact that amity should come, not rancor, not jealousy. If I see others are in misery, then karuna, the compassion should come. I shouldn't feel that tit for tat, he is paying what he has, he's just reaping what he has sowed. Instead of that, that compassion should well. So this karuna should well. So these are the things which bridges us. When you are outside to bridge, I should have that amity, I should have that sense of compassion, empathy. These are very important. The next thing is very important. Whenever see any good qualities in others, holiness in others, if it is not my own community, then we will find what happens, that is Sutra is speaking. We find a type of disbelief. We find that the idea of disbelief is coming. Sometimes we think that the other person has some hypocrisy, a show off. So there they are saying, be reverential to any holiness you see, anywhere, any good qualities you see anywhere. So these are the subjective feelings which actually is going to help us to really create the bond. So that is the thing which has been spoken of as mudita, that we respectful towards other, because that respect helps us to rise in love. You know, when I respect other, it helps in both the ways. Even if I don't know the person properly, the moment you are showing respect, actually I am culturing the good qualities for which I am showing that respect. And that way I am culturing those good qualities, good habits. Instead of thinking the bad things, I'm thinking the good things. The more I think of the evil qualities, the more I am culturing those evil qualities and I inculcate that. So respect helps us that way. It helps us subjectively and it helps us, the other person also. When you respect others, the other person becomes responsible. The thought comes, why he's showing respect to me? There must be some reason. Yes, for such and such ideals, which he thinks that it is the thing I represent. For that he respects me. So I should be up to it. So that way both, through respect, both rise. It is a equality by rising, not by pulling each other down. So that's very much required in society, to have that mutual sense of respect, love, sympathy, and last is upeksha. Upeksha means when I see fault in others, be indifferent. Don't just go on hating or blaming others. Be indifferent. That's in English we say a very interesting thing, that build on strength and overlook weaknesses. There's a wonderful saying of Andrew Carnegie, the famous industrialist, when it was asked that why there are no so-called labor unions in your industry. What he told was something very interesting. He told that when you are searching gold, that in the river beds, sometimes some of the river beds have this gold. You have to wash a lot of mud to get just one speck of gold. One speck of gold you get after washing a lot of mud. So Andrew Carnegie, very nicely he told, when I am searching gold, I am not bothered about the mud. My whole attention is on the gold. By that he wanted to say that everyone has gold within. Just wash away all the so-called weaknesses, the things which are not our strength. We need not look at them. Try to measure the person, judge the person by strong points. And that will help us in the wonderful social bonding. So the bridging happens that way. This is a wonderful sutra in the Yoga Sutra which speaks that how we can bridge when we are meeting with the people outside our so-called this family bondings, through by showing Maitri friendship. Whenever we find anyone is going through prosperity, we relate not through jealousy but through friendship. Whenever anyone is in a miserable condition, we show empathy. We try to have a sense of respect for others, and we try to overlook the weaknesses. So that's the very important thing for bridging. And in the present world of this multiculturalism, there is so many peoples of so many different faiths are intermingling together. Here nowadays we find we have to. That previously we were geographically separated and we were quite happy with our faith in our geographical area. But now the situation is as the world has become a small village. But what's the thing that we are saying? That when this world has become physically so small, now what is required is metropolitanism. What is metropolitanism? Now I, being a Indian, I have my own staple diet. But for a change, suddenly I go to an Italian restaurant and enjoy an Italian dish. That doesn't mean I have forsaken my own staple diet. Just for a change, I go and have the food of a different taste. And that way I just develop the taste for all other food habits without renouncing my own. That is what multiculturalism speaks of. So nowadays, in the present scenario, it's very important that where we some now and then go and taste the other faiths also. It in no way entails the forsaking of my own faith. It remains intact as my staple faith, like a staple diet. But at the same time, I can develop a fellow feeling, a recognition that all the faith has the same nourishing value that I can develop, and that again can help us in bridging up with all the various faiths which we find, various organizations, various faiths, various cultures. And that's how we can think of having a wonderful bridging in the present scenario, in the present world. So in the short scope, I just try to speak on this building, this community, on this bridging community from the yogic perspective as much as possible. Thank you all for giving me this scope.